To other news now, and of course that's the weather. A heat wave is hitting large swaths of central and eastern Canada and parts of the United States. Dangerously high temperatures are expected to last several days right across much of Ontario, southern Quebec, New Brunswick and parts of Nova Scotia. With humidity, it could feel above 40 degrees Celsius at times. South of the border, heat warnings are also in place across much of the Midwest and Northeast. Science and climate specialist Darius Madavi joins us now with more on these brutal conditions. Darius, explain the heat dome for us.
Right. So what's really happening here is we have a high pressure system setting over parts of the states that's really driving this heat coming up to us here in Canada. Now, it's mostly affecting eastern Canada at the moment, central Canada, really, Ontario and Quebec, but it could spread to other parts of the east as well, although probably not as extensively, not as intensely, because we are expecting some very high highs. Now, really, if you take a look here, you can see what's driving this phenomenon. We have this high pressure system sitting over it, and rather than this hot air rising as it usually does, instead that high pressure system is causing it to sink. And so as we continue to see that hot air heat up at the ground, it tries to rise and then it gets forced back down where it absorbs even more heat. And so the longer that high pressure system stays in place, the more intense the heat is going to get. So that's why in the next couple of days, the heat might intensify even more. And that also can drive some thunderstorms. And that, which we're already seeing in parts of the province actually, and parts of Ontario. And that can mean, just means even more moisture, more humidity being added, and just makes it feel even muggier, even stormier, or even hotter. So that high pressure system there over Florida, over parts of the states, really driving this heat. Now that pressure should start to drop towards the end of this week, but for now it's still in place, and you can see those that bright red color there indicating some very high temperatures being experienced across Ontario and Quebec. Yeah, certainly a lot of red on that map. So Darius, what should people keep in mind in the days ahead? Well, the main thing to keep in mind is that you should try and stay indoors in cooled areas as much as possible. Temperatures are going to reach high enough to have some pretty serious effects. Now, if you see this map, there are heat warnings just blanketing both Ontario and Quebec. Many places that could see temperature records set for those for their region, for that city, but also some for the day, but also monthly temperature records being threatened here. That's how intense this heat is. And with that humidity, which we're not looking at here, only those values are only for the basic temperature, it's really going to feel pretty nasty. And so temperatures could climb high enough in the next couple days that even a fan is not going to be enough to keep you cool. As humidex values start to exceed into the high 30s, into the 40s, that means that those fans are not going to do much. So try and stay somewhere cool. Go to a library if you can. Go to a movie theater, somewhere that you can get access to some air conditioning if you are experiencing extreme heat, or just try and get some water to cool off. That's the main things you can do. But yeah, temperatures easily breaking into the 40s when you account for that humidex in large parts of Ontario and Quebec in the next few days. So just be aware, keep that heat in mind, and try and stay cool as you can. Yeah, do the best you can. Okay, Darius, appreciate it. That is the CBC's Darius Madavi in Vancouver. In the midst of the heat, many have been calling for air conditioners in places in need, like childcare facilities, schools, and retirement homes. But my next guest believes that it may be problematic. Caroline Metz is the Managing Director of Climate Resilience and Health at the Intact Centre on Climate Adaptation at the University of Waterloo, and she joins me now. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So when temperatures soar, many Canadians, of course, they turn on their AC for relief. Why is that a problem?
Well, the argument against air conditioning is that it produces waste heat. So it transfers heat from inside a building to the outside. So essentially, we're heating the outdoor air, which we don't want to do. And then air conditioning uses electricity. And in some regions of the country, that electricity is generated from burning fossil fuels, and that also contributes to climate warming. And then there's some extra demand on the energy grid with air conditioning. But I think what we have to keep in mind with extreme heat and with a heat emergency is it's essentially a health emergency. If it's not treated, or if there's prolonged exposure, it can lead to heat stroke, which can be fatal. And many groups are more sensitive to heat and heat illness, and that includes the elderly, people with underlying health conditions like heart disease, asthma, COPD, diabetes, mental health conditions, and then also people who live alone, or people who live in buildings that are poorly adapted to heat, or that don't have access to cooling. So in an extreme heat event, for people who are more vulnerable, having that access to cooling can save lives, and this is a good use of energy. So I think we need some level of it, and maybe the consideration is that we transition to heat pumps, which are more energy efficient and can be a more sustainable option.
So to talk to me a bit more about some of the alternatives here and what could be used as opposed to air conditioning, except in those circumstances where you're talking about.
So there's a technique called passive cooling. It's actually a series of techniques where you cool an indoor space without using electricity. So it's things like learning to use windows and doors to naturally ventilate a room, especially at night. It can be adding shading to windows, so curtains or blinds on the inside of a room, or adding awnings and shutters to the exterior of homes or buildings. And those shutters and awnings, they block the solar energy from coming in. And then additionally, any trees or plants on a property or on balconies can provide shade and cooling. And that's if the risk to wildfire is low. So this passive cooling is really, it's relatively simple to implement. It provides a few degrees of cooling inside of a building, and it's a really great complement to air conditioning or heat pumps. It provides that baseline level of protection in the event that we have a power outage.
Talk to me about how some of these alternatives, like what you're talking about, could be implemented on a larger scale, perhaps entire municipalities or a city, for example, or would that be difficult at this point?
No, cities are moving forward with some really innovative strategies to cool neighborhoods and cities at scale. So one of the things that cities are undertaking is mapping urban heat. So that means identifying the neighborhoods and the streets that are the hottest in a city, because heat isn't distributed equally. And then they overlay social sensitivity. So the city knows where to spend money. They prioritize those investments for the neighborhoods with the greatest need. And then secondly, cities can undertake tree planting initiatives. So to improve or increase the tree canopy across the city, taking it from anywhere, 10 to 15% to 30% coverage of trees across the city. And trees cool a city by providing shade and they cool the air through evapotranspiration. And that level of cooling can be up to 8 degrees Celsius, so quite a significant benefit, in addition to taking carbon dioxide out of the air, reducing our emissions, protecting us from flooding, and trees and green space provide a lot of mental health benefits. So greening a city, it has huge advantages.
Yeah.
And then cities can also respond to heat events working with community partners for on-the-ground outreach.
Certainly a lot of additional things that cities can do other than just go to the AC, especially as we get hotter and hotter summers as that trend continues. Caroline, appreciate it. That's Caroline Metz. She is the Managing Director of Climate Resilience and Health at the Intact Center on Climate Adaptation at the University of Waterloo.